I don't know exactly why you would want to prepare bones or what you would be doing with them. Um, I know bones have a long history of being used in voodoo rituals. They also have a long history of prognostication, soothsaying, and whatnot. So anyway, we've had our night at the barbecue. We've eaten as much of the chicken as we can. Turkey works nice. I boil them in salt water. So in many cases, the next step would be to soak the bones in a mixture of water and dishwashing liquid for a number of days, and that would help degrease them a lot. I don't find that I've had a particular issue, and then basically I scrape everything clean and I put it out to dry in the desert sun, and they usually get pretty dry, dry enough for my purposes. So we got some bones. You can just basically take the bones in out of the sun and they'll look essentially like this. They're pretty whitened already from the sun. Sometimes you'll have a little bit of whatever was hanging on there and it'll turn a little brown. It doesn't particularly bother me. I do have ants out here in the desert, but I've never had an issue with the bones. Once I've boiled them and scraped them and put them out in the sun, the bugs don't bother them. Sometimes squirrels will bother them, or sometimes if you have mice, they will come and they will take the bones and they will eat them, or they will scatter them and you'll find them all chewed up. I'm not a big fan of the chicken leg bone, mostly because it's immediately recognizable as a chicken leg bone. I like these bones. These are basically chicken wing bones. I like their shape. I like their size. And I like the chicken thigh bones as well. It's a good kind of nondescript, easily recognized as a bone, but most people, even though they probably have had, a million wings in their life, don't immediately say, oh, chicken wings. Maybe it's the context that you put them in. Now, you can go straight to coloring them or carving them. In my case, I'm going to carve them, and here's one that I carved without sealing first. I carved it and then I did a black wash over it, and actually, because these bones are very porous, the bone actually soaked up more pigment than got inside the niches that I had carved, the little carvings. That's basically what that turns out to be if you don't seal it and then you do a black wash, like a 2 or 3 or even 4 to 1 water to brown paint or water to black paint wash. You just paint the whole thing, let it dry for a few minutes, and then wipe it off, and you would end up with a stained bone like this. You could actually use wood stain. It just depends on what you want. If you want a highly polished bone look, you can just get something like this, and you can just spray it with the gloss. This is UV protectant or resistant, so it doesn't yellow. In the desert here, the biggest problem that we face is not wind, it's not cold, it's the sun. The UV rays from the desert sun will turn just about anything into dust, or it'll make it so faded and so brittle that it'll be worthless in just a very short time. It's really remarkable how short a time. Of course, you can hit it with some ivory paint. I've got some solid white paint. This makes it look very like movies white. It's not what bones typically look like. Bleached in the sun, they typically look a lot like this. So I'll show you some other bones that I have carved. This one I sealed with semi-gloss, and then I carved in the notches and niches, and then I hit it with some black paint, and you can see that black paint really got into the carved portions and didn't stick nearly as much to the bone as the unsealed bone did. So I like the way that turned out. This I did a similar process. I just used some red food coloring and it got down into the carved portions, and it did, the food coloring actually did stain a little bit more than I expected in spite of the sealant. Maybe if I had put more sealant on there. And then what this is this is basically just carved with a Dremel and then sealed. The Dremel works, and it's kind of fun, but it's kind of wide. I don't really have a very fine-tipped Dremel bit. I'm sure that if you found a nice fine-tipped bit that you could carve the bone with, I wouldn't know what that's called, but I think that would do a great job. So what I actually use a lot is my trusty razor knife. I will use from time to time this small drill bit. This is actually a wood burning tool. It's got this very pointy, almost like an awl on it. If I had an awl, I would probably use an awl, but I don't. So I don't plug this in because I don't want to burn the bones. I just want to make marks in them. So this is basically the three tools that I use, and you can use whatever works. Now, as far as what kind of things to etch into the bones, that's entirely up to you. If you want to be super accurate and look into whatever tradition you're trying to emulate, if you want to look into shamanic symbols, if you want to look into some kind of Wiccan or whatever, there are, of course, Nordic runes that a lot of people are very interested in, and the Nordic runes are pretty good because there are a lot of straight lines. It would be better, I think, if you probably knew what the marks meant, but at the end of the day, it's a Halloween decoration. I know that the I Ching has a lot of symbols that are basically broken lines, straight lines and one line broken into two pieces, and I know that goes back to reading the cracks in a shell where the turtle shell had been put in the fire until it expanded and cooled and it cracked, and then the soothsayer would try to predict the future based on an interpretation of the cracks. So basically, if you're doing something that's like, if you were going to cut these into smaller bits, and you could cut them into smaller bits and use epoxy or something to kind of model them. But I'm just going to use the whole bones. If you're going to use these as some kind of fortune-telling thing, then the point is that any random crack would do. This particular one, actually, I broke it and then I glued it back together. I didn't break it on purpose, but I did glue it back together because I wanted to see that crack and I wanted to see how that worked out. Anyway, my point is, any lines will do. Any marks that you want to take the time to make will do. It doesn't matter what side of the bone you pick. If you're going to put these in a necklace, then you have to figure out where you're going to drill the hole to hang the bone. Are you going to hang it this way, what are you going to do? And then what are you going to display? So I almost certainly should be wearing gloves of some kind. But basically, I'm just going to start scoring the bone. I've been making these kind of small. I think maybe I'll make a big symbol. In fact, if you really wanted to, you could do one large symbol per bone, especially if you were doing something that was runic or at least looked runic. If you're trying to accurately represent, say, a Viking soothsayer, then yeah, you should probably do your homework. I don't think all runes are Nordic runes either. Didn't really go and do an internet search on runic traditions before I did this, because this is about the bones, not the marks. So what I use the drill for is probably just what you'd expect. If I want a little dot or whatever, then I just by hand make a little hole. Of course, the bit will scratch as well, but it's not really its strength. I have an awl and I have a razor, so I don't really need to worry about etching using my drill bit. So there it is. I've put something in there. It's pretty hard to see. So I'm going to take a fairly fine brush. I think I'll just go with black. I don't need a ton of water in the black. I just need to thin it down. Let's see how that looks when I wipe it away. So I'm not too thrilled with how that came out, actually. I know that I had hit this with a layer of the spray gloss, but it apparently wasn't enough. So it's still a little porous. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do a wash over this entire bit here. I'll let that dry for a minute. Find another bone. So I'm going to try just one big symbol. I don't know what the symbol means. I don't know if it means anything. I don't even know what the symbol is going to look like until I get there. Sometimes the awl will slide out of my control. It'll go a little farther than I expected, or it'll actually dig a little deeper than I expected. Trying to turn that into a specific character seems unnecessarily difficult, considering in this case it's just going to go around the neck as a prop in either a costume or as dressing on a costume on another prop. This is the one that I set aside to dry a moment ago. The bone really soaked up a lot of the paint that I expected to come off. So what I'm going to do is come back over this bone with a little dry brush of ivory. And normally I would use the dry brush to make highlights pop, but what I'm doing with this is I'm going to use it to try to make the lowlights stand out in contrast. So you end up with something like that. Alright, so now you can see with the wash, I only slightly thinned this and the lines got much darker. I don't know how much you can tell in the camera, especially since this bone is already kind of dark. But the lines themselves are basically reading black against the lighter bone in the background. So, I think that's just about all I've got today. At the end, whether you sealed with the clear gloss or not, you should probably seal after you've done whatever painting or staining. It's going to protect the paint and it's going to protect people also. If you handle, especially something that's been wood stained, without this, then sometimes the sweat or the oils will pull that stain out onto your skin, and this will help prevent that from happening. If you do go with the sealant, I think it's important. I can already feel this one is rougher than I wanted. Probably do at least 2 coats, maybe 3, so that the paint doesn't soak into the bone. If you don't want it to, if you want that to stand out. Of course, you don't have to carve these at all. You don't even have to leave them in one piece. You can break them if that's what suits your needs. If you did break them, I would probably leave the broken bones out for a bit longer even to dry. I left these out for days in the Arizona sun. I want to say probably 5 days, day and night. They were out there, and they're very light and they're very dry. But if I was going to break them open again, I think I'd give it at least another day or two exposed to these 100+ temperatures and the harshest UV that I have available, just to make sure that marrow is all dried up. And I think that's all I got for you today. This is Dry Rot signing off.